Hello, my name is Dre Her, and today I will be talking about the cultural perspectives, products, and practices of body modification in France, Tunisia, and Benin. I spoke to one woman from each of these countries and did separate research on each culture and how they feel. Before we get into each individual country's perspectives, products, and practices, we need to be on the same page and talk about what body modification is. Body modification has been defined as a personal choice that changes your physical appearance. Examples may be piercings, stretching, or punching, which is similar to stretching, but you punch a hole into your ear or whatever body part to begin with instead of having to go through the process of stretching. Tattoos, implants, plastic surgery, and more. If you look at the bottom left corner of the slide, there are images of foot binding, neck stretching, and tooth shaping. These are not common in French cultures, but are an accurate example of body modification in other cultures, specifically Asian cultures, and how it's common and cultural in all different parts of the world. The top left of the slide is the before and after of a facelift, which is plastic surgery. And then the middle of this slide is more common types of body modification, such as stretching, tattoos, and piercings. The first conversation that I had was with a woman named Flaminia from France. She was originally from a small city in France, and then she went to college in Paris. She told me that in France, people do have some level of body modification within their culture. Similar to here in the US, ear and simple nose piercings are fairly common among adolescents, but almost non-existent in older members of the population. Flaminia is in her late 20s, and she said that she has many friends with multiple piercings, some with nose piercings, mostly ear piercings though, and a few with small, meaningful tattoos, and she even expressed hoping to get a tattoo herself one day. She even said that since tattoos are becoming popular, more jobs have been seeing them as standard and not as a reason to fire or refuse to hire somebody. This will eventually lead to public view also changing because people with tattoos, piercings, and other body modifications can be just as employable as those without. Body modification is becoming increasingly popular amongst the working class in France. Since it's popular now, average people in France can be expected to have piercings and tattoos, whereas before tattoos especially were connected to ex-cons and people perceived to be quote-unquote lowlives in some way, shape, or form. Because of who got tattoos and how people perceived them, workplaces had rules to not allow people with tattoos to work there. I have images in this slide of the bottom left is a piercing studio. It's the front room of a piercing studio, and the cabinets are full of different piercings that you can get, like metal jewelry that you can put in fresh piercings. And then the top one is a tattoo studio, and all the little frames on the overhead are art that the artists have drawn. I couldn't find any pictures of the back, but you can see from these pictures that these places are very clean, and they actually do in France have more laws against cleanliness, and they have more inspections of tattoo and piercing shops than here or in a lot of other countries, making it safer to get tattoos there, but it also means that they have more cleaning products and they spend more time cleaning. As far as perspectives, other than what I've already talked about, most people that get tattoos think that they have to have some sort of meaning, at least in France, and typically they're very small and in places of the body that are easy to cover up. For my second conversation, I spoke with a woman named Aya from Tunisia. Tunisia is in northern Africa on the Mediterranean Sea, and Africa as an entire continent has a really rich history of body modification. Tattoos in Tunisia are now less common, and seem to be more reserved for alternative and impulsive individuals, but they used to be extremely popular amongst women. Specific face tattoos still hold a lot of cultural significance to the small group of people that get them, even though the number of whom is declining. There are still people that do get them and do hold the culture of getting them very sacred. There are artifacts and instruments used to practice body modification hundreds of years ago and versions of them now. There are even some tattoo artists that use tools and methods that resemble the ancient ones to provide similar tattoos to those that were once super meaningful and popular. These artists can recreate the instruments and tattoos and piercing styles in a safer and more modern way. Aya told me that she has her ears pierced, but she would never get a tattoo, and that she's heard of people having them, but doesn't actually know anyone who does. She told me that she lives in the northern part of the country where tattooing seems to be more common, but she doesn't actually know anybody that has tattoos, so that shows you how uncommon it is at all. Like, there are people that get tattoos, but there aren't nearly as many, and it's very uncommon to just see somebody randomly walking on the street with tattoos. The northern part of Tunisia is where tattoo shops are and where people tend to get tattoos. But the southern part of Tunisia has a primarily Muslim population, and a lot of them don't get tattoos for cultural and religious reasons, even the ones that aren't Muslim. Which means that if anybody living in the southern part wanted to get a tattoo, they would have to take a day or two off work or plan their vacation around it, because they'd have to travel pretty far to get the tattoo or the body modification of any kind and then come back. The shops that do exist are usually very small, and while not seen as unsafe in any way, they don't have as high standards for cleanliness as France does. This means that they probably have less cleaning products in their shops, and they probably spend less time cleaning. The job market in Tunisia is also very oversaturated, so a lot of people living there are 16 to 35, and tattoos are only recently coming back into popularity with that exact age group. So those that get tattoos will probably be less likely to get jobs than they already are, because the job market is so slim and they're already super unlikely to get a job. So it would be really difficult for them to get a job if they got a tattoo due to discrimination, which is part of why tattoos probably aren't very popular in Tunisia. On the bottom left of this slide is a picture of a traditional style Tunisian tattoo done more modernly. You can see the diamonds in this tattoo, or the diamond-like shapes within it, are the only parts of the tattoo that are shaded. The rest of it is dots and lines. That's because older instruments for tattooing were smaller and non-mechanical, so it was harder and took a lot more time to get smaller details in or large amounts of work in one spot. The upper picture on this slide is of the inside of a tattoo shop in Tunisia. You can see the men working there aren't actively tattooing anybody, but they're posing for the picture. This shows the difference between the tattoo shops and the style choices in Tunisia versus France. This tattoo shop specifically is much more masculine, and I would say that the tattoo shop in France is more traditionally feminine in nature. The last and most recent conversation that I had, I spoke with a woman from Benin named Clemence. Benin is the birthplace of voodoo. It's on the west coast of Africa, so a lot of cultural practices and products and all of that are similar to the ones in Tunisia, just because Africa is a very interconnected continent, even though they are further away. Benin is on the west coast and is the birthplace of voodoo. Because of people's perceptions of what voodoo is, people think that Benin may be full of witches and black magic, but Clemens told me that that's not what voodoo is. There are, however, traditional voodoo tattoos. If you see the woman that I put in the middle of this slide, she has face tattoos. You can't see them very well because they're old, but each different line has a different meaning. The meanings can be like courage, love, things like that just mean a lot to that woman specifically. Most traditional voodoo tattoos are just lines and dots and symbols and aren't really very shaded, and it was very common for women to get these face tattoos. The bottom left corner is a voodoo festival, which I didn't look much into because it's not about body modification, but you can see it's not as dark and witchy as people project voodoo to be. Clemence told me that she has a tattoo on the back of her shoulder for her children's birth flowers, and that some of her friends have some very small tattoos, and that almost all of them have at least their ears pierced. She told me it's rare for anybody to have large and non-aesthetically pleasing tattoos. So like any tattoo that anybody has is probably like easy to hide and it looks nice and it's pretty small. As for piercings, Clemence said something that was really surprising to me. Female babies have their ears pierced ritualistically the day after they're born in the hospital. They take them to a separate room that they have specifically for ear piercing and giving shots, and they have the small little clicky devices that have the earring like loaded into them, and then you just like close it together and it goes through the ear, which are known to be not the safest piercing devices, but it's easier to pierce a baby that way because if you have like a needle near their head and they move, you could stab them in the face or in the neck. But she said that she didn't know that they were going to pierce her baby when she had her first daughter. When she was a day old, they took her to get her shots and asked Clemence if she wanted to go with them, and she said yes because she was able to move around freely and she wasn't in a lot of pain. So she went with them, and before they did all of her shots, they pierced her ears. And they didn't ask her anything about it. They didn't say anything about it. They didn't act like it was a big deal or anything. And she didn't seem mad. She was just like, oh, they do that? Okay. I would have been mad. I don't know about you, but I would have been mad. She didn't know why they do that. She said that the baby didn't cry much more than she was already crying from like just being newborn. But she didn't know why they do it in such a ritualistic hospital setting and why they didn't ask her about it. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. Body modification has different perspectives, products, and practices in every culture, even ones that speak the same language, so I hope that there was something that you could take away from this.